HiggTalks podcast. I'm your host, Jake Reid. With me, we have Andrew Hicks, who's the principal at RevTech Labs and founder at Horned Frog Investment Network. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, Jake.
And so tell me a little bit about yourself, how you got started in the venture capital world.
Well, kind of a long story, but happy to kind of start from the beginning. So, as you know, we've known each other almost our whole lives, I feel like. I've got some good pictures of us growing up playing originally Roughnecks football and things like that, but grew up here in Fort Worth like you. Obviously went to All Saints together, but went to college thinking I would work in the oil and gas industry. Being from Fort Worth, seeing people be really successful with starting their own oil and gas companies or working for bigger companies was something I was really intrigued with. And so studied energy technology management in college, and distinctly remember being an intern down here downtown working for XTO Energy and ExxonMobil, and kind of realizing, I wasn't a huge fan of this large kind of corporate environment. And, I had been a relatively entrepreneurial kid, and so had started a few little businesses and things like that, but didn't really think of it as being like an entrepreneur. I just enjoyed starting companies and enjoyed making money. And so, wanted to chase that a little bit more. And so I remember moving over to go work with my brother-in-law as he started his own small business, and realized, this is what I really enjoy. I enjoy starting stuff and kind of building, things from the ground level up. And so after college, I was really fortunate. I met two guys, and they hired me as the first employee of an oil and gas technology company called Run Title. And so we started that company in Austin, Texas. Ended up raising a seed round from a group called Austin Ventures, who was kind of like the OG venture capital group in Austin. And so we raised about $4 million seed round. Distinctly remember closing on that round, and my dad, asked me, how are you actually going to get paid? Is this a real job? Is this a real opportunity? And so it was. And so we built that business. We grew it into profitability, ended up raising another what's called a Series A financing round of about $8 million from a group called Founders Fund, which is the kind of venture capital arm of Peter Thiel. And so we were well capitalized, well-run business. And so I got kind of a front row seat and realized pretty quickly, I love not only building an early stage company, but doing it in what I considered a really supportive, like, startup community like Austin was. And so fell in love with that world and quickly knew this is what I wanted to do with my life. And the investors that we had worked with were just absolutely fantastic, and was able to learn a lot from them. And so in the back of my mind was, always saying, how do I get that guy's job, or how can I sit in that seat at some point? And so we built that company. After a few years, I had a non-compete for about a year, and I went and worked at Merrill Lynch and got my financial securities licenses and things like that, and tried to kind of diversify my background a bit. And that quickly expired, and realized, hey, I want to start another company. And so went over to a different company, and we did the same thing. We raised a seed round, built an early stage financial technology company within the oil and gas space. And so it was round two for me, and just, doing stuff that I loved. And but I still had that kind of itch to switch over to the investment side. And so I knew without having, a $500 million or $1 billion exit under my belt, it's not super easy to make that move. And so we moved back here to Fort Worth, and I started my MBA at TCU, and wanted to kind of use that as an opportunity to pivot from, all this early stage operating experience to being an investor in early stage companies. And so, started interning at different venture capital funds, and was trying to kick the door down in any way that I could. And you talk to a lot of people in this industry, and they have, these fantastic backstories about how they, had no intention of being a venture capitalist, and they just fell into it and they love it and blah, blah, blah. I'm kind of on the other end of the spectrum. Like, for 3 years, I was highly intentional about wanting to work my way into this world. And so, spent every waking moment pretty much trying to kick the door down. And so had been getting experience, at a few different funds, was, very fortunate to be selected as one of the two kind of MBA fellows for the local angel group called the Cowtown Angels. And so it finally kind of gave me a platform to do what I wanted to do. And so was able to get exposure to the industry through those internships and opportunities. But ultimately, we kind of spotted an opportunity or a gap in the market here locally in Fort Worth. And we decided to build what's called the Horned Frog Investment Network, which we can talk a little bit more about later. But started that kind of my second year of the MBA program. Shortly after graduating, met the team at RevTech Labs Capital, which is headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina. We are a fintech, so financial technology venture capital fund. We also run what's called an accelerator, which we can talk a little bit more about too. But I joined the team there close to 2 years ago, and so principal in the fund, so kind of lead our investment practice and run day-to-day operations of the fund, and get to spend a lot of time with really smart entrepreneurs and working with them to help them with successful outcomes.
That's awesome. So I want to circle back to the Horned Frog Investment Network. So kind of tell me a little about it, kind of how you guys got started, kind of where you see yourself in 5 years, let's say.
Yeah. So like I said, we saw kind of an opportunity, and there's some amazing angel groups locally and nationally, and we saw the opportunity to do things a little bit differently, and also to leverage, the power of TCU in a lot of ways, and the power of the TCU community. And so we started that with the intention of really bringing venture capital as an asset class to Fort Worth as a community. And one of the most alarming things that we had seen was, Fort Worth at this point, I think, is the 12th, 13th largest city in the entire country. And where we ranked in terms of venture capital dollar outflows into early stage companies and angel investments was more comparable to like Bakersfield and Toledo and some of these really, really small markets. So we started asking ourselves, why is that? And we wanted to leverage our background as entrepreneurs and folks that had built companies and raised capital previously. And so just started talking to the community, started talking to family offices, started talking to high net worth individuals and the kind of classic profile of people that should be investing in this asset class, and started asking, what is your exposure and what is your background or knowledge of this, kind of niche asset class, and why aren't you investing? And we started kind of hearing the same reasons over and over and over. And we looked at ourselves and said, I think we can fix a lot of that. And, the number one thing that we kept hearing was getting access to the highest quality deal flow is a huge challenge. And if you know anything about venture capital, that's the name of the game, is getting access to the right opportunities, getting access to the highest quality opportunities. And so we were seeing those, and we thought we could solve for it and kind of, be a connector of those two things, connecting the capital community locally with what we consider tier one venture capital opportunities. And so we decided to kind of start and build a model that's, we think is very different than anything that's out there that exists in the entire country. And so TCU has been incredibly supportive all the way, up to the top. And so from day one, we kind of identified, the first 25 kind of high net worth individuals or family offices or institutional investors or just people that like learning about venture capital and seeing these types of deals and looking at deal flow and doing it with like-minded people. And so we spun that up and, recruited our first 25 kind of founding members that took a chance on what we were doing, and said, okay, we're going to provide deal flow to the Fort Worth capital community. And so started utilizing our networks. Within the first, I think, 6 months, we invested in 6 companies and had deployed a few $1 million. And
wow.
A lot of the feedback we were getting was, how are you guys finding these opportunities? And why are we getting a look at this? This seems, too good to be true in a lot of ways. And it's a testament to kind of what goes on behind the scenes, as well as just the power of the TCU network. Like I said, we are very fortunate to have some incredibly sharp and successful alumni that really help fuel everything that we do. And so, we kind of consider this, let's call it, direct investment platform as, one of the pieces of the puzzle. And so not only do we kind of engage the community and provide what we consider really high quality deal flow to them, and help kind of structure the investments, help source these investments, obviously, but we're also performing all the due diligence, and we're doing all this stuff behind the scenes that can enable people to effectively invest in this asset class. Outside of that is the stuff that I get really excited about, which is we hire, 6 or 8 MBA students every year. and we're hiring them and we're teaching them about venture capital through them doing real transactions. So by the time every single one of these students graduates, they know how to run the process from beginning to end. And what I mean by that is they know how to source a company and find a relevant opportunity, how to have the initial conversations and speak to the founders in a professional way. They know how to do the research, the due diligence, and then communicate that to our network as well. And even know how to structure the investment and how to finance these things. And so they can walk into a job interview and say, here's how I sourced it, here's how we funded it, here's why we invested $500,000 into this company, and they can turn in and show their investment memo that they produced. And for a student to be able to do that, as opposed to just talking about what they learned in their classroom, is a huge competitive advantage for TCU grads. And so that's been really exciting, is to kind of ramp up this education arm of what we're doing with the student demographic, and we get to do it to the community as well. We get to teach the folks that have traditionally had no exposure into this investment class about this, and that's really exciting. And we get to kind of empower this capital community, not just by showing them deal flow, but giving them the skills that they need to actually make investments. And I think that's how we kind of grow this community, and I think it can fuel some really exciting stuff locally.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I was blown away. We actually had a Higginbotham table at the Venture 101 most recently, y'all's event that y'all put on, and I was just blown away just kind of how educational focused y'all were with the community as well as with Horned Frog Nation, so to speak. So kind of to backtrack a little bit on that. So the Venture 101 event. Tell me a little bit about kind of the speakers y'all had there, kind of what the purpose was, the mission, and kind of, what y'all see is kind of, we've spoken on the side about this, what y'all see in the future as when it comes to these events and kind of what y'all like to accomplish.
Yeah. So Venture 101, started off as kind of a small idea, honestly. And so we had been running the Horned Frog Investment Network for a little over a year. And a lot of the members, they trust us, they like the opportunities that we present, but they were coming to us and saying, guys, this is fantastic, but I'd love to build my skill set as well. And I'd love to learn more about this. And so we looked at each other and said, I think it'd be kind of neat to take a lot of what we do in the classroom with our students and apply it to the community. And so we started taking bits and pieces of the curriculum and, mapped out kind of what we thought would be a rough agenda. And we looked at each other and said, it'd be kind of cool to bring in like maybe a guest speaker, like a other venture capitalist that we know, and so that we can kind of pick their brain and they can hear about how he thinks about investments and whatnot. Well, that turned into us having a full-on conference with about 135 people that attended, as you saw. And so we were very fortunate to bring in some of the speakers and panelists and talent that we had there. But like I said, it kind of started as this small thing where we wanted to at least allow our members and the people within our network to build these skills and really empower them to learn about venture capital and kind of take what they learn and apply it to the investment world. And so the first half of the day was basically taking a lot of our course curriculum and teaching people here and saying, hey, here's how you look at these opportunities. Here's how you should be evaluating them. And here's kind of best practices. But also like backing up and going way more high level than that and just talking about, here's how venture capital as an asset class looks, and here's what the return profile looks like, and here's, kind of the risk profile as well. And so giving people what we kind of considered foundational knowledge within this asset class. The second half of the day was just an A-list of speakers. And so, we brought in local entrepreneurs, we brought in local venture capitalists, but we also brought in some of the best investors in the entire world, and a few folks that have quite literally wrote the book on venture capital. And so it was a really exciting day. The turnout that we had was fantastic, and I don't think there had really been anything like that in Fort Worth to date. And so to see the kind of reception that we were able to get from the community and some of the takeaways that people had there was fantastic. And we already have bigger and better plans in place for next year, so we're excited to do it again.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, it was a wonderful event. We were just happy to be a part of it, and I was definitely there for the high level knowledge because I did not understand any of it going into it. But no, it was truly amazing, and y'all did a phenomenal job. really to kind of go off kind of how we were talking about entrepreneurship, right? So folks that want to, get into venture capitalism as entrepreneurs, I mean, do you have any advice for them, kind of what they should do? What's kind of those first steps that they should start thinking about?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a question I get quite a bit as well from, whether it's students or just young professionals that are looking to kind of transition into this career path. There's no kind of two stories that are the same. I kind of told you about how I was very intentional about making that jump and really had to kick the door down in a lot of ways because the opportunities are very limited. And so, I'm very appreciative that I was given a platform to kind of go out and try and make investments and build a track record to say, hey, I effectively can do this. And so, honestly, that's kind of the advice that I give a lot of people is, you want to build complementary skill sets that are going to be applicable to being a venture capitalist prior. But that could be a lot of things, because just because you've spent, 10 years working in P&C insurance doesn't mean you can't make the jump to being a VC, because we invest in insurance technology companies all the time. Mm-hmm. So you might just be a little bit more specialized as opposed to a generalist. But the advice that I kind of give most people is, there's a few paths that are more, traditional to make that move than others. And it's having a consulting background, having a private equity background, or having an investment banking background. The other kind of path is, working in tech and having built companies or products yourself, so that you kind of had that exposure to what it's like and what it takes to be successful in that space. And honestly, I probably wouldn't be very good at what I did if I didn't have experience, in kind of building companies early on. And so those are kind of the four paths that traditionally dominate that. But like I said, if you're not one of those, if you can't check one of those four boxes, that doesn't mean you can't make the move. And so no matter what your background is, I encourage people, the first thing I say is you got to have the knowledge base. So come sit with the Horned Frog Investment Network. Go to entrepreneurial meetups and listen to founders pitch their company and get those repetitions. Those repetitions are going to be critical. So getting reps and looking at opportunities is probably the best way to start. Then you've got to build up your knowledge. Read everything you can. Stay well versed into what kind of deals are happening in the market today. There's plenty of newsletters and things out there that track every deal in the venture capital space that's done. And so understanding what kind of companies are getting funded and who's actually writing those checks is critical as well. And then the third thing I recommend is, it's great to go out and get an internship or a fellowship and get that exposure, but at some point you kind of have to stop asking for permission to do this job. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is just go out and do deals. Mm-hmm. So prove to people that you can do it. And there's a ton of different ways to do that. You can go out and start taking meetings with founders and ask your network, hey, if I bring you relevant opportunities, would you take a look at it from an investment perspective? And start building that track record, whether it's syndicating opportunities or working at an angel group or kind of being a venture scout or something like that for other funds. Mm-hmm. Build that track record. Show that you can do this job effectively. And once you kind of build out that record, you can take that to other places and say, look, here's what I've been able to do over the last few years with very minimal resources. And that kind of proves that you can do the job. And I think that just makes the jump even easier. But opportunities are tough to come by in this space. And so doing whatever you can to kind of separate yourself from the pack is really important. Yeah,
that kind of goes to my last question. So as I sit kind of the other side of the coin, right, the other side of the table, Higginbotham supports plenty of startups, small companies, right? And I think one of the biggest issues there, that they have trouble with is going to these VC guys and asking for seed money, right? And trying to fund their venture. I mean, from your perspective, VCs, like what are y'all really looking for criteria wise, or what's kind of one of those things that can help out a small business to start up?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And, a lot of times I think people have to ask themselves, do I need to raise capital or do I need to raise venture capital? And what I mean by that is a lot of times you need to go out and kind of get some seed money to build your company. But a lot of times you're better off not raising capital, and you're better off maintaining 100% ownership of the business and really taking a different kind of business model or a different approach to building that company. And so us as venture capitalists, we have to, due to the failure rate of, and just the nature of what we do, 75% of startup companies that we're investing in are probably going to fail or not return any capital. And so you take that under consideration, and when we make an investment, we know there has to be a pretty large return profile associated with this. And so that's very different than building a small business. And something that could grow into, a $5 million revenue business is something I would consider a massive success for somebody starting a small business. Unfortunately, that's just not nearly big enough for it to make sense for any sort of venture capitalist. And so we are looking at what I call venture scale businesses, meaning companies that are going to scale very quickly and take a huge portion of the market and try and produce massive exits that can, at a minimum, 10x or 100x our investment. And that's kind of the lens in which most venture capitalists and funds are looking at when they're making these investments. And so for local companies or small businesses, you kind of have to ask yourself that question first. What kind of business am I building? Am I building something that's going to be massive scale where we're going to need a lot of capital to kind of get to the places we need to go? Or does it make more sense to kind of, scale slower and, build a more sustainable business that doesn't have to raise millions and millions of dollars? And we don't necessarily need venture capitalists subsidizing our business for the first few years. We can be profitable early on, and we can build a really sustainable business. And so if you're a startup or a small business owner out there, the first question I would tell you to ask yourself is, do we really need to raise capital? And if we don't, that can be a good thing. That can be a great thing for you, because you can maintain, a much higher degree of ownership. You can have control, and you don't have the high expectations associated with raising venture capital money, which means grow at all costs. And so there's a lot of companies out there that don't necessarily need to raise what I consider venture capital money, but they do need kind of the support of the local investment community to kind of get something going. But those are structured wildly differently than a venture capital investment.
Okay, Andrew, so I'm going to paint out a scenario for you. Let's say I just have this killer idea, and I want to do so many things with it, and I'm just trying to raise money for it, but I don't necessarily want to give away that ownership, let's say, kind of the venture capitalist route. Any advice there, kind of the Shark Tank model, so to speak?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So if you look at yourself and you say, hey, I've got a great idea, or I want to build a company, but I know I don't want to raise venture capital, or my business model might not be conducive to raising venture capital, how do I actually get this thing going? I'm going to give some kind of maybe a little different advice that I would give most people, which would be, go out and sell the product. So a lot of people say, hey, I need to get this done before I can ever do anything. And they just end up not ever starting. And so go out, get some sales in the door. And so you're building a company, and you need to go out and get customers from day one before you even have a product that's even sellable. And that might sound crazy to a lot of people, but go out and say, hey, if I can provide this to you for a 25% discount, will you fund, write the check up front? And so use your customers to fund the idea or fund the business. And so doing some pre-sales, things like that to get some cash in the door might mean you might not ever have to actually raise additional outside capital. And so it's a huge kind of little trick or piece of advice that I give most people is like, go out and sell before you even have a product. That might sound counterintuitive, but if you can kind of get some contracts signed or initial capital coming in to kind of fund what you need to do from a capital standpoint in exchange for giving your early adopters a discount, it's a very viable way to kind of get things moving in the right direction early on. Outside of that, there's tons of local programs and national programs like grants. There's obviously the angel investor community is not just focused on early stage, kind of venture capital opportunities, but they love looking at small businesses as well. And so, engaging with that local community, finding people that, have been successful in that vertical that you're looking to build in, and approaching them and saying, hey, here's what I'm doing, would love your advice in order to get this thing started. And the age-old saying is, sometimes you ask for advice and you get money instead. And so, going to people like that you know and trust, and kind of showing them your business model and showing them exactly what you want to do can be a really beneficial way to not only raise money, but get somebody that's going to be helpful along the way, and could be, potentially a good strategic value add, just not just dollars in the bank.
So Andrew, my experience is kind of a lot like yours. I went to school, I got, masters, all that kind of stuff. Kind of what would be your advice? You said you spoke on how you worked at Merrill Lynch and started some small businesses. Let's say a scenario where a TCU student comes to you, says, I got a great idea. I want to go to school, but at the same time, it sounds like, a lot of guys went and got experience, and then, patch that experience with kind of their idea to make sure that, they had experience along the way, but could take off with the idea as well. Is there any advice there that you could kind of, either run this way and get some more education, more certifications, licenses, or hey, stick with that dream and run with it? Any kind of, sifting through that mess of train of thought, if that makes any sense?
So there's no better way to learn, in my opinion, than by doing. And going out and just starting. And you're going to learn so much by just going out and starting from day one. And a lot of the things you're going to learn, you would never be able to learn in a classroom. That's my personal experience. By just doing, you get exposure to what it's like to actually build something, and getting that experience is crucial. And so I would encourage people to start doing it. The things that you can get access to in the classroom are going to be supplementary to that. And take your lessons that you're learning from building and apply that to the incredible professors that you have at school. And you're gonna increase your development period exponentially. And so kind of doing both things in conjunction, I think, is obviously the best way to learn. But I can't recommend enough people to just start and just do it, and actually go out, put yourself out there, and fail sometimes. Like, failure is the best way to learn in a lot of ways. I've done it plenty of times, and so I think, there's so many programs on campus that can be incredibly supportive and beneficial to a student's development if they're building as well. Mm-hmm. And so being able to take these kind of real world lessons and apply it to the classroom is just an amazing education in and of itself. And so I can't encourage people enough to go out, get that real world experience, be out on their own as an entrepreneur, and kind of feel what that's like, and kind of get some of those reps in. But each person is different. Sometimes it takes people, 2 decades to kind of work up to being able to make that jump. And so there's definitely nothing wrong with going out, getting experience, learning the ropes from somebody else as well, before you can kind of time your jump into the entrepreneurial world. But the best education that I've seen is going out and building something and doing it. So I can't encourage people enough to make that jump.
Well, Andrew, as you may know, HiggTalks podcast is for the entrepreneurs out there, but we're also an insurance company, so we got to talk insurance for a second. We like to ask all of our listeners and people that come on the podcast, kind of, what is your biggest pain point as it pertains to insurance?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I would say now that I've started to get a little bit older, and started to move away from just kind of the basics of, hey, I need a term life policy or something like that, and have to start venturing out into some other products as we get older, start having kids and things like that. They start getting a little bit more complex. Term is something that's really, really easy for most people to understand, and it's affordable as well. And when you start venturing into, maybe whole life and some other products and things like that, you look up one day and you go, wait, maybe I don't quite understand everything that I've got from a policy standpoint. And so my biggest pain point is, just maintaining a grasp of what kind of coverage I have outside of even a simple term life policy. And so, looking at it on a holistic basis, maybe like once or twice a year, I find myself, asking the same questions year over year. And so I'm always having to call up my guy and have him re-explain things. And so I would say my biggest pain point is just you forget a lot of times about how does this product actually work? What's kind of the granular details of something like this, and why did I sign up for this again? And so it always comes back to me and makes sense. But, I would say from a pain point standpoint, it's just, as somebody that doesn't do that professionally, it's lack of understanding of kind of the granular details of some of these more complex products would probably be my biggest pain point.
So if I'm somebody that's interested in the Horned Frog Investment Network and want to get involved, how do I go about doing that?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So most people think we are just for TCU alumni and just for TCU students, which is not exactly the case. We kind of view our organization as really a community benefit for anybody here in Fort Worth. So we're not just investing in local companies. So we're investing in companies all over the country. And so from a deal flow standpoint, we are geographically agnostic. From a kind of membership standpoint, we are obviously focused local and wanting to kind of empower this local capital community. So if you're an entrepreneur out there and you have a great idea or you're building a startup, whether you're a TCU alumni or not, we'd love to hear from you. And if you're somebody that's interested in looking at these opportunities as an investor or just somebody that wants to learn more about this stuff, we'd love to have you as well. And so we do periodical events. We would love to host you and kind of show you everything that we're doing. But the best way to kind of get in contact with us is shoot us an email. We call the Horned Frog Investment Network HFIN, so HFIN. So send us an email at hfin@tcu.edu, and we'd love to get you involved.
So Andrew, this has been great. If anybody wants to reach out to you, where can we find you? Contact information, email. What are we talking here?
Yeah. So feel free to send me a message or add me on LinkedIn. Obviously, for folks out there that use Twitter, I'm just at Fort Worth VC. And like I mentioned earlier, if you have an interest in the stuff that we do on campus at TCU, or just learning more about kind of the local venture capital community here, send us an email at hfin@tcu.edu.